We're finishing up this chapter in the Tanya, chapter 42, which is talking about the higher and lower level of awe and how to challenge them. And you can use the word awe, you can use the word reverence. There's all kinds of words in Hebrew. It's yira. And the whole point of yira, the whole reason why I'd want to be able to channel yira is because something is either got my ego in it or it's holy. It's one or the other. Anything in my life, it's either got some of my ego in it or it is holiness. And if something has any of my ego in it, even just a teaspoon, it cannot be holy, because what is holiness? Holiness is the recognition that there's only God in the universe. There's only the infinite. And any ego that's there, no matter how seemingly innocuous, that's going to get in the way of holiness. That's going to block that oneness. And the way for me to get holiness to dwell on the things that I'm doing, even the feelings I'm feeling for Judaism and people in my life, is to approach it with that initial sense of lower yira, lower awe, because it's that lower awe that gets me out of the way and says, okay, there's the infinite here, and I'm gone, and now I can be part of oneness. So between the love and the awe, we want to learn how to first challenge that sense of yira. So everything I do as a Jew is going to have that sense of I can be out of the way and I can be a channel for the infinite. At the beginning of this chapter, just to wrap us up, we talked about how Moses in the Torah said, all God asks of you is to fear God, is to have yira, to have reverence for God. And immediately all the sages jumped up from the table and said, what do you mean just to fear God? How is that all you have to do is fear God? Isn't awe of God a difficult thing, right? Because I don't see God. I'm naturally just relaxed on my own. And if I want to tell a lie or I want to daydream about something negative, why should I fear God? It's a difficult thing to achieve. And the sages answered, well, it was a small thing for Moshe. And then all the sages jumped up from the table and said, what do you mean a small thing for Moshe? Moshe is talking to every one of us, right? Doesn't matter if it's a small thing for Moshe. What about me? How is it a small thing for me? And this chapter answered that because Moshe is actually the channel, is a shepherd, so to speak, that allows each of us to have what's called da'at. Da'at is the attribute that allows all my abstract ideas to become real feelings. I can learn about all this kabbalistic, beautiful stuff, but unless I have that dot, it's not going to become real feelings. It's not going to change whether or not I snapped at my family in the morning, whether or not I got up early enough to do a prayer practice that I want to do, whether or not I'm going to help my friend who needs a tire change in the middle of the night. I need to have feelings about it so it becomes part of me. And because each of us has access to that flow from Moshe, even now, it is an easy thing. And the second point is, and the Alter Rebbe brought up this contradiction again, where the sages say, if there's no fear, then there's no wisdom. And then they say, if there's no wisdom, there's no fear. So we get a catch-22 where, okay, do I start with fear, awe, or do I start with chokhmah, wisdom? And the Alter Rebbe says, well, there's a lower level of yira and a higher level of yira. And this whole chapter has been about the lower level of yira. The lower level of yira is the same as when I'm at a dinner with some people and I eat politely. Whereas when I'm at home alone, it's 1 a.m. and I get up because I'm hungry and I go to the fridge. Maybe I'll just take a pickle out of the jar and eat it right there standing in front of the fridge, right? Maybe I'd do it, but I wouldn't at a table with friends. I wouldn't go to the fridge and take a pickle out of the jar and eat it right there. I'd sit at the table. I'd say, oh, do you have any pickles, please, to go with this hamburger? That's what I'd say. And they'd bring it. Please pass the pickles. So I have a sense of inhibition that's natural, that's fine when people are around. And all we need to do is impress on ourselves that just like people can be around, the infinite is always around. All I am is a spark of the infinite. That is my entire soul. I'm nothing beyond that. So the infinite's always aware. And if I just have that in mind enough that I'm inhibited enough, the way I would be in front of some dinner guests, that is the lower level of fear. That is a lower level of fear, and it goes a long, long way, and it can introduce this sense of holiness and getting me out of the way. And then my sense of love can be built on that. So that's this is a big chapter with a lot of sidebars, but any questions about that basic principle, about this lower level of fear, before I bring us to chapter 43? And if you're online, let me check if you got any questions. I'm going to go to my own Facebook page. There we are in class. So please put any comments here and I will keep track. And good to have you with us. Hi, Tom. Hi, Tom. Good to have you with us. Please let us know any thoughts. The end of chapter 42, we talked about the sense of what is Emunah. The word Emunah, faith, Hebrew Emunah, English faith, is related to the word uman, which means an artisan, an artist. If you've ever seen a painter or a pianist or a carpenter or any craftsman, you see that they just do things naturally, easily, wonderfully, gracefully, because there's been so much repetition. A craftsman, an uman, has to repeat the same task again and again, whether it's scales on a piano or pirouettes on a stage or brushes of a paintbrush. And it becomes so much a part of them that now they can express themselves, their essence, effortlessly. And faith in Kabbalah is not something that I prove to myself and then I have. Faith is like any skill, like playing piano. It's a skill one has to work on and build so that then I can have this sense that I get out of the way and that I'm aware of God. So you can't prove it or disprove it, but you can work on it to allow that sense of holiness and that lower level yira to be there in your life. 43 starts. And here we talked about two levels of the lower fear. Just very, very quickly, the primary level of yiratata is just recognizing that God's creating the world on a regular basis all the time, is always aware of everything, is the only one here. And because I can be in awe of the world, I can be in awe of creation and the sky at night and the Grand Canyon, then naturally I get a little bit of awe of God. I'm aware God is here. And so I behave with inhibition. But in that, there's a small version and an expanded version. So the small consciousness version is dealing with the physical world and the awe that I can inspire from that. An expanded consciousness version of still the lower level of awe is looking at, as we saw at the beginning of 43, the, so to speak, the dimensions of the spiritual worlds and how from one to the next is so-called a 500 years journey, and the feet of the angels are bigger than all of them, etc. And when I meditate on the spiritual worlds that we've learned about and how they make the physical world seem insignificant, and we're not talking about physical space because the spiritual world is not physical, it has no physical space, but it is that many levels greater than the spiritual world. And that will cause even more a sense of awe, an expanded sense of awe. But all that was still lower level awe, still lower level yira. The higher level of yira, and this is a key concept before we dive in. And then we are diving in. Okay, let's start at top of 657. So all that we've discussed is the lower level of reverence. You see how this system of Kabbalah is so distinct about levels of emotions and levels of meditations and how to achieve them. All that was a lower level of yira. Now we're going to go to the higher level of yira and how to define it. 657. Kayira ila yire boshet. Go ahead, Noreen. Top of 657, however.
However, as for yira ila, a fear stemming from a sense of shame before God's greatness.
You know, I'm always careful of that word shame, and shame is not boshet. It's hard to, there's not an English word for what this is. If someone has a better one, please let me know, including those watching online. Boshet means someone is just so awesome that I don't even remember that I'm there. Someone is so awe-inspiring that I forget myself. So if I'm backstage and I see some great artist who's so charismatic and so talented, right? And I go and I say, hi, right? And I'm just looking at this person and thinking of everything they've accomplished and all their talent. And I'm gone. I'm away, right? We had a whole conversation about why it is that we have awe in front of a world leader, right? Why is it that if I were in front of the president of the United States, I would feel a sense of awe, right? Not necessarily because the person is necessarily so talented. They probably are. I mean, if we've elected them, I'm sure they're smarter and more charismatic than me. But when it's a world leader, what am I in awe of? As we discussed, I'm in awe of the army they control, the number of people that they have authority over, the amount of land they have authority over, the influence they have over the world. It's power over real things that cause a lower level of awe because it's related to the world. It's related to the world. It's not who they are. It's what they do. Because if I ran into President Barack Obama now, I'd be excited and in awe, and of course, but not like when he was in the White House, right? That would have been a different story because now I'm just in awe of the person, but the president, that represents something about what they can do, what they control in the world. Whereas, what if I met the greatest tzaddik in history? What if I met somehow Moshe or Abraham or Sarah, right? And I stood and I saw this holy person and nothing to do with the armies they controlled or how many camels they had. It was all about the depth and holiness of this person. How is that different than the awe I feel because someone controls a lot of land or rules a lot of people? The first level of awe is about what the person can do in the world. The second kind of awe of a tzaddik is just about who the person is, about their essence. That is the kind of awe that we can have about God. And if we do, that is called the higher level of awe, yira ila'ah. And it's all about, I'm just relating to the essence of what God is, and I'm completely gone because of that. I'm not relating to God because God created the world, as awe-inspiring as that can be, because guess what? As I said, if the infinite made a resume of all the best things about the infinite, creating the world would not get on it. It would be like shuffled off to the side, not even impressive. Because that's just something that God is doing from God's speech. One word creates the whole world. There's nothing for God. And the creation of all the worlds did not change God in any way. So this level of awe allows us to have awe directly regarding the essence of God and the truth of the greatness of the infinite, as opposed to just dealing with the superficial aspect of what God did when God said, let there be light. Let's go inside. V'yira pnimit shehi nimshechet mipnimit halokit shebetoch haolamot.
And an inner fear that derives from the inward aspects of godliness within the worlds.
So although I'm relating to the worlds, I'm in awe of the inner aspects, the pnimius of godliness as it is in the world. And so I can't really relate to God directly. And that's just, how do you relate to the infinite? But there is godliness in the worlds, right? A Torah scroll, us learning Torah, the relationship between two people. And when I look at the godliness within the world and I relate to the essence of God and I have awe of that, now that erases my ego in just with much more inwardness. It's a different thing. And this solves our catch-22. Leha amru imein chochma ein yira. Marcus, if you want to go ahead, at the bottom of 657, and you want to unmute as well, concerning this level.
Wait, can you hear me?
Oh yeah, you're good.
Alrighty, excellent. Concerning this level of fear, it was said by our sages, if there is no wisdom, there is no fear. This level of fear must be prefaced by wisdom.
Excellent. So this level, it's not something you just jump to. I can't just, someone can't explain this to me and I just go and I say, okay, I'm living my life from an egotistical perspective. As we said, that doesn't mean I'm a bad person, right? Doesn't mean that I'm harming people or that I'm immoral. It just means it's about me, right? When I give someone tzedakah, it's because I couldn't handle seeing someone suffering that much. It bothered me and I wanted to relieve my own sense of unease. So I gave them $1 and now I feel better and I feel like I'm a good person, right? I gave them tzedakah. I mean, I still did a mitzvah. It's still a good thing. But that is the nefesh b'amit. That is the egotistical soul at work, because in the end, I did it to soothe my own feelings. I didn't do it only because someone needed it. Only because someone needed it. Right? So when I lost my train of thought. I suppose it was, yes. So when I start off with this level of lower level fear, now I have to turn my life around and start infusing that chokhmah, that awareness of the oneness of God, that there's nothing else, into my thought, speech, and action. And now when I give someone $1, it won't be because I couldn't handle seeing someone suffering and I want to feel better, because I'm out of the way, right? I'm so in awe of God, I'm not there. Now I can give tzedakah, the same mitzvah, but now it's infused with holiness. And I can learn Torah, not because I enjoy learning Torah and how fun, and now I'm a wiser person, and perhaps people think of me as a real, smarty pants. But no, I'm learning Torah out of a sense of awe again, because I'm connecting to the infinite and I'm out of the way. Once I've done that, and now I've connected to our kabbalistic tradition with this sense of lower level awe, now the higher level awe can emerge. Now someone can't just walk up and say, this is the higher level of awe. I have to have the lower level that brings in that sense of chokhmah, where my mitzvot and my Torah learning now are infused with a holiness. And now when I focus on the essence of God and I meditate to create a sense of yira, that can be the higher level yira. Rick, you got a question? You're like, or you were just like, that is so amazing. I'm so inspired. Is that what that was?
That's how I feel.
Great, Marcus. Good. I love this chapter. Now we'll refresh what chokhmah means for those that may not have been with us. If you see the tree of life and all the sfirot as they project onto the human experience, chokhmah is the beginning of consciousness. Chokhmah is always the top. If you're looking at the picture, I don't know if I'm flipped or not for you, I'm getting confused, but on my right, the right lobe of the brain, that's where the metaphor for chokhmah is happening, which is inspiration. Right? Chokhmah is the beginning of any appreciation of consciousness, and it's not comprehensible. Right? The moment I have a spark of chokhmah in consciousness, I actually don't know what it is, because it's coming from outside consciousness, and my intellect cannot reach up there. The only way it gets through is a spark of nothing, so to speak. And only a quarter second later, does it start to expand in Bina, and now I can comprehend it. But Chokhmah is an incomprehensible flash that's a window beyond consciousness. So how will we define it here? De Chokhmah hi koach ma. Go ahead, Rick. Or did you? Oh, sorry, Doreen, why don't you go ahead? Rick is got kids.
Okay. For Chokhmah is koach ma, the level of nullification, which is termed ma, what, as the verse says, and we are ma, a phrase that expresses the complete and total nullification, which is termed bitul b'mitzuat.
Yeah, bitul b'mitziut, which means complete self-abnegation, complete surrender. So this sense of chokhmah, what it means is koach ma. There's a little wordplay there. The word chokhmah can be taken apart with the words koach ma, the power of pure inquiry, the power of saying, what is this? Of being open to something completely new. To be open to something completely new, I need myself completely out of the way. And none of myself can reach up beyond my own consciousness to grasp and pull that sense of that spark of chokhmah. I have to be gone. So the whole quality of chokhmah is self-nullification, self-abnegation. Go ahead, Ruth.
And chokhmah comes from ayin, nothingness, for which reason chokhmah is ayin and nullity. Right?
So there's nothingness as in really nothing, and there's nothingness as in something so above my any frame of reference that there's nothing that appears to me. It appears like nothing because it's infinite in relation to me. So this chokhmah comes from ayin. That's the ayin that is infinite, not the ayin that is just an absence of something. And again, that chokhmah, if when we look inside in a meditative state and we recognize that inside me is this absolute sense of nothing, that when I go up to the beginning of my consciousness and try to gaze past, there's an emptiness there. That is the ayin. That's not an emptiness that has no potential, it's an emptiness that has infinite potential. And chokhmah is drawing from that level of our soul. Any questions about this? We've gone through chokhmah, so most of us are probably relatively familiar with. Good. Ve'ezehu chacham haroeh et hanolad. This is beautiful. Perush haroeh kol davar ech nolad mithaveh me'ayin liyesh bidvar Hashem beruach piv yitbarech kmo shekatuv u'beruach piv kol tzava'am. Is it Eleanor? So we're 658.
And our sages said, moreover, who is wise? He who sees that which is born and created. That is to say that the wise person is he who sees how everything is born and created from non-being to being by means of the word of God and the breath of his mouth, as it is written. And by the breath of his mouth, all their hosts were created.
There's so much in this, right? You could read it and think, oh, this is, biblical poetry and sort of Jewish sage language, who is wise, just sees how everything is born. The Alter Rebbe is saying, what is the reality of the world and how does it relate to this sense that there's only the infinite? When we say that the world was created by God, we might think that happened at the beginning of creation, the Big Bang, and now the world is here, has its own reality. Kabbalah comes to keep reinforcing a new lens, which is, it's a constant process. The infinite is constantly creating the world at every quantum moment, in every detail, actively. Yes, Marcus.
This might be branching off into an entirely different thing, but doesn't that go along with the fact that eating is elevating sparks of creation?
I think it relates directly to it, yes, because if I see the world as being, here's a plant, it's existed, it happens to be grown, now I can take it, and why not eat it, right? If I see the world as God is creating this plant or this animal right now, okay, now, what right do I have to eat it? And what's the point of me eating it, right? This is God's making this thing right in front of me. So yes, that's why in Judaism, we have to ask for permission with a blessing and then eat it with a certain intention and then do productive things so that that spark does elevate. So
okay.
Exactly. Yeah. I think those are intimately linked. Good.
Okay. Thank you.
So once we integrate that perception, that perspective, that the world is being projected onto time and space every nanosecond, now I can have that sense of chokhmah in my own life, that what is the reality of the world? And here, I want to speak to anyone who's learned Eastern traditions, because it's got a lot of press that the world is an illusion, the world doesn't exist, just detached from the world. I know I've spoken about this in the past, but it bears repeating. The world does exist. Okay, so I got it from the highest sources directly, from the Baal Shem Tov and the Alter Rebbe. The world does exist. Yes, it's an illusion, but it exists. And why? Because the magician here is not you or me or Penn and Teller. The magician is the infinite. So when the infinite does a magic trick, excuse me, when the infinite speaks and the world happens, that is real. That is reality. So for us, although the world is an illusion, we're not perceiving it accurately. The illusion that we're seeing is a real world. And when someone is suffering, and that's the take home, we have to help because God specifically put that suffering in front of us, had me notice it, and gave me the tools to help with it. That's the Jewish approach. So I am dealing with a real world. That being said, does that world have its own reality? No. So it is a real world, but where does the reality of that world come from? It only comes from God's reality. It has no reality of its own. And what is chokhmah? Chokhmah is sensitivity to that. because the world is only being spoken by God at every moment, always, it has no reality of its own. It's completely nullified to the awareness of, or the reality of, God's unity. And so although it's a real world who has its own, none of its own reality, and it's completely nullified before God's reality. When I'm sensitive to that, that is chokhmah. Chokhmah is the sensitivity to bitul, which is self-nullification, and the non-existence of created beings, the appreciation that worlds don't have their own existence, but depend entirely on the power of the infinite. I know it sounds like we're really splitting hairs that have already been split when I talk about this, but this is such a key distinction. Because if I say the world is an illusion and it doesn't exist, now fine. What does it matter if someone's suffering? That's fine. That's legitimate. God forbid, right? If I say, okay, the world is real, now the world is real and it exists and there's something besides God. And so I come to another conclusion. I'm real too. And don't my feelings matter? Why doesn't my ego matter? If I get hurt, isn't that a big problem? Hard to get myself out of the way. So I'm stuck. Either the world's an illusion, and now who cares about suffering? Or the world's real, and now why shouldn't I care about myself? Kabbalah and Hasidus says, the world is real. God is infinite. God is making an illusion that is real. That is what God can do as an infinite being. However, the reality of the world is only God's reality. It's nullified, like a ray of the sun within the sphere of the sun, as we said. And so, yes, I relate to the world. I fight. I struggle. I do my part to help the world. Suffering is real. But at the same time, I have a consciousness that it's all nullified before God, and that allows me to get out of the way. That's the essence of Chokhmah, and that is what can lead us to this higher level of Yira, where I'm just so completely gone because I'm so in awe of God's essence. Like, that's a huge one to me. I'm curious. Any thoughts either here or on Facebook? In terms, because yes, Eleanor.
There we go. What helps me with that comment, with that concept, is the thing that came up in chapter 42, that the world is really the garments of God.
Absolutely.
And that's what helps with that concept in my brain.
Yeah, and that is another very, very often used metaphor for how we see God's essence in the world, right? And the quote was, how to start? This is the quote that's in our prayer book. Asher kol masher shamayim v'aretz hem libushim chitzim shemel kadosh baruch hu le'yedei ze yizkor tamid al piyutam v'chayutam. That everything, the ikar, the key, the core of this practice is recognizing that everything we see is just garments of the infinite, and therefore we're going to impress, like an artist, in my mind and my heart through repetition, that I can relate to God's essence because the world is just a garment. Yeah, so very much the same thought. And yeah, for many people, as a meditative practice, that's going to be more effective than the total abstract meditation that the worlds don't exist, and so I should have awe of God's essence. That's tricky. Other people, is it relatively clear, this idea, the nuance that the world is real but doesn't have its own reality? Is that landing?
Yes.
Great. And I said, just as the light and brightness of the sun are nullified within the body of the sun. If you can picture a sun ray coming through, I can point to it as real, but travel back to where it was in the body of the sun before it emerged. Now, is there really a sun ray? Not really. It's just the sun. So that's what the reality of all of creation, physical and spiritual, that's how much reality of its own it has. Like a ray of the sun still in the ball of the sun. You look at it, it's like, that's just sun. And I can't point to any sun ray at that point. And now this is probably where we get closest to the Eastern philosophy of nullification of the ego, because we can meditate on the worlds and say, okay, the worlds don't have any reality of their own, but now can I turn this inward? can I look at all my own petty feelings and grievances and opinions and say, okay, Michael is also included in this. Michael also has no reality of his own. Michael is just dependent on God's reality. And that's where you really change yourself if you can. And it takes time and meditation. V'al yotzi adam atzmo mehaklal. Yeah, Cindy.
Therefore, okay.
No man.
We were at therefore.
Oh, I missed all that.
Mhm.
Ve'ayla zot harei hashamayim va'aretz v'chol tzavam b'tilim b'mtziut mamash b'dvar Hashem beruach piv uchla mamash chashivei ve'ayin va'efes mamash. It's a lot. Kivitul or v'ziv hashemesh beguf hashemesh atzma.
Therefore, the heavens and the earth and all their hosts, that is all of creation, are truly nullified out of existence within the word of God and the breath of his mouth. The level of their nullification is thus not that of Bitul Hayesh, but of Bitul Mitzut,
Yeah.
and are accounted as nothing at all, as naught and nothingness indeed, just as the light and brightness of the sun are nullified within the body of the sun itself.
Because if I look at the Grand Canyon or the stars or the power of a storm or the ocean and I say, that's great, God's creating it, wow, I'm in awe. And I experience an emptiness and I'm gone and there's a little holiness dwelling on me. That's bitul hayesh. That's nullification of my yeshus, my egotistical existence, the sense that I take up any space, right? So I can nullify that. But bitul mimitzius, nullification of my essence, that comes not by relating to awe of creation, but relating to, as I said, awe of God's essence directly. I'm not looking at what God's doing, creating the world. I'm looking at who God is, infinitely everything. And now I can be nullified in my essence. And as you said, no person should exempt themselves from this principle. Now we turn that inward and we say, it's not just about the physical world, it's not just about the angels and the spiritual worlds. Little me in there, that also has no reality of its own. Again, it's real. And so if I have a flaw in myself, I really need to fix it because I'm doing real damage to the world. If I have ugliness inside me, or if I'm self-centered or selfish, or if I don't care about who I'm talking to and their feelings and their infinite potential, if I'm always thinking about me, that's a real problem that I really need to work on. So I can't just leave it alone. Say, it's an illusion. Who cares? I'll just enjoy life. But my reality is only dependent on God's reality. I have no reality of my own. So I'm nullified, potentially nullified right to my essence, which is beautiful because that allows me to work on myself and improve the world, the real world, in a real way. That also, go ahead, Linda. Yeah, if you can unmute for us too. Linda, you're still muted, so thank you.
Are we at and no man should accept himself, or at that his also?
Yeah, why don't you do that and then the next one?
Okay, and no man should accept himself from this principle, from the principle governing all created beings, about which he understands that they are totally nullified to God. He should realize that also his body and nefesh, ruach and neshama are utterly nullified in the word of God that created them. And the next part too?
Yeah, please.
And his word is united with his thought, and God's thought in turn to one with God himself. Thus, the nullification is not only to God's word, but is a total nullification to God himself, as has been explained above at length, chapters 20 and 21, by analogy with the human soul, one utterance of whose speech and thought are veritably as nothing when compared to the power of speech, which is limitless.
He's going back to a long conversation we had in chapters 20, 21, where we said, imagine as a metaphor, the next word any of us is going to say, and how that relates to me, how much that is nullified in me, because there's levels between one word that I might say and the essence of who I am, right? One word is already nullified in my power of speech, because I can talk and talk and talk, right? God knows, just ask my family. So one word is nullified already just in my power of speech. But now my power of speech is nullified in my power of thought, which leads to the speech. And I may be getting the order wrong as we're going. And my power of thought is nullified in my attributes of emotion, which determine what I'm going to think about. My emotive attributes are nullified in my intellectual power. And so by the time I go through all these levels, I realize that one word that I said, it's so nullified many, many times compared to the essence of who I am, that it has no reality. And then the Alter Rebbe said, and that difference between one word that you might say compared to your essence, that the difference is basically collapsed to nothing compared to the difference between one word God says and God's essence. And all of creation is being created by a word. Let there be. Right? God uses just 10 utterances to create all of creation. So here he reminds us that when he says we are nullified, we can use that metaphor, if you learned it with us, that one word that God could use to create all of creation, I'm just one speck within that, and it's all collapsed into nothing in all the levels that we've learned about of God's attributes. Each one is an infinite leap that we can't even imagine. But let's not go deep into that. V'zehu shemar ha'katuv, hen yirat Hashem hi chochma. Paula, if you want to unmute for us, we're gonna. This is 660. This is what is meant. There you go.
Okay, isn't it? Turn the page.
Yeah.
Okay. This is what is meant by the verse, behold, the fear of God, that is wisdom. Go further.
No. I'm just taking that in. That's Job, right? So Job is talking about the higher level of fear. And of course, Job had to deal with that. He had such a difficult life because of the whole story that for him to relate to God, he was a very lofty soul. He's saying that higher level of fear, recognizing that even I don't exist. And no matter what troubles God sends my way, I'm going to say, thank God. Right? I'm going to bless God. That means his ego was completely vanished at its essence, and he was related to God's essence. Ela b'kiyum Torah v'mitzvot al yedei yirat atah chitzonit v'zeu shamru im ein yira ein chochma. Go ahead, Noreen.
However, one cannot attain this fear and wisdom except by means of the fulfillment of the Torah and mitzvot through yirat ta'ah, which is an external fear. And this is what is meant by the statement, if there's no fear, there's no wisdom.
Right. And remember, we're not talking about just doing the mitzvahs. We're not talking about becoming a technical Jewish person saying, here's the list of things I have to do them and just getting them done. We're talking about infusing them with a sense that I'm relating to an infinite being and I'm having some sense of reverence. So whatever mitzvahs we do, and loving another Jew is a mitzvah, right? Serving God with joy is a mitzvah. Can you serve God with joy out of a sense of reverence? I think so, right? So many of the emotional and relational mitzvahs are pulled up in this, and we're not talking about am I doing 10% of the entire canon of mitzvahs in the Torah, or 50 or 100? I'm talking about whatever I do, adding this sense of lower level reverence, which is just a sense of, as we said, if someone are watching me, I do the right thing, so I'm going to do the right thing now. And when I do that now, when I infuse that sense of reverence into my practice as a Jew, now I can turn back to the infinite and I can relate in an essential way to the infinite. Okay, that was Yira. And said this chapter and the next bunch of chapters until about 50 are subjects about which we can meditate. right? So if I'm going to describe this chapter, we learned the concept. Jewish meditation says if you think about something, you're going to feel it, and then you're going to do it, right? If you think about something, you're going to have feelings about it that will be inspired, and then you will act on that. And so these chapters are all basically stuff to think about. These chapters are all meditations that will lead us to a lower level of awe, a sense of love, a higher level of awe, and those will be the wings that will elevate my Jewish practice. So now, we've learned a principle that everything is created one opposite the other. So if there is a Bilam, there's also Moshe. And for there to be a great prophet Moshe, there had to be a counterproductive prophet Bilam that was just as great. So trick question, or not trick question, if there are two levels of Yira, how many levels of love, of Ahava, would you guess there are? By show of fingers.
Infinite.
So, okay, I like that even better. But we're going to start with two, which divide into infinite gradations. So they're both correct answers. So just like in awe, there are two levels. Now, hi, Roberta. Welcome to our class. Good to have you. Please go ahead and put some questions on. I'm watching you guys there. When it comes to love, the ahava that we're going to build on this base of reverence that we've created, there are also two grades. Here's the names. V'hinei ba'ava yesh gam ken shtei madregot ava rabba ve'avat olam. Ava rabba hi ahava b'tanugim.
Now, in love too, there are two grades, Ahava Rabbah and Ahavat Olam. Ahava Rabbah is a love of delight and ecstasy, a love of God which delights in him. There is no other desire or goal present, such as the desire to cleave to him or to expire in one's yearning for him. The love itself is compromised purely of delight in him and cleaving to him.
So let's introduce these two types of love, Ahavat Olam and Ahava Rabbah. And they're related to the levels of fear. Ahavat Olam means love of the world. Olam means world. So Ahavat Olam, basically, just like the lower level of awe, I love things in the world. I think if you're human, you can relate to that, right? I love music. I love chocolate. I love my kids. I love skiing. Whatever it is I love, I can love it deeply and naturally. It's an easy thing. But I might disconnect that if I'm wise, I see how the world is being born, and I see that all the things I love, I'm really loving God because they have no reality of their own. It's God that is projecting them right now. I'm in a relationship with God. If you like Eleanor, they are garments of God. And so if I love chocolate, that means I love God. If I love my wife and my kids, it means I love God, right? Or if I have a husband, if I love my husband, then I also love God. Whatever it might be, when I relate to things I love in the world, if I can connect the dots, now I can inspire this level of Ahavat Olam. Because like the lower level of fear, it's relating to God and creating emotions by the world, what God's doing. And if I love things in the world, therefore I love God. So the types of meditations we're going to learn to inspire Ahavat Olam are, again, relating to the world and relating to the beauty and greatness of the world. And especially Psukei de Zimra, for those that have a morning prayer practice. The Psalms we recite before we get to the Shema, they go over the beauty of the oceans and the world and the mountains and nature, and it goes through, and the poetry inspires me because I love creation, that I also love God. It's easy. However, Ahava Rabbah is an entirely different thing. Whereas Ahavat Olam is like a yearning love, where I love something in the world, and now I recognize God's creating, and I want to connect with God. That leaves me with a sense of yearning. It's like, basically, it's like, when I have a crush on someone, but they don't know it yet, right? And I'm thinking about how am I gonna get on their Instagram, or how am I gonna, sorry, it's not Instagram, it's Snapchat, right? But I'm distant from the person. I'm thinking, how can I connect? I want to be close to them, and I'm filled with a passionate, fiery yearning that I want to reach out to something that I have a distance from. Ava Rabbah, that is my grandparents sitting on the porch on the rocking chairs. They've lived decades and decades together. They have a quiet, deep, profound love for each other, and they're just totally at peace, just hanging out. Right? If they got each other, it's a beautiful day, and they can sit and rock and exchange a few words, and whatever they do, they're so together, they're so one, they're so united. There's no longing. It's like a cool, still body of water, like a lake on a still morning that's just perfect glass. And it's not reaching for anything because it has closeness. Ava Rabbah is someone that's already experienced closeness to God and recognized that they're part of God's oneness. And now whatever's happening, they're totally at peace. They're totally serene. I think we'll do a little meditation ourselves, and we will pick that up when we come back. And this is a beautiful time to be learning this, because this is Elul, where an image we use is that God is, or the king, as we say, is in the field. So imagine we're all living in the city, and the king has a palace in the city, and we're all subjects of this ruler, but it's very hard to get time with the ruler because they're off in their palace behind the guards and with the court. But every so often, the king walks out into the field and wants to greet everybody and is just in a good mood with a smiling face. And anyone can leave the city and go right up to the king and look at the beautiful face and the beautiful clothing and sense the wisdom and exchange a word. So our tradition says this time Elul, it's a time when God is not distant in the spiritual worlds. God is available. All we have to do is just walk right out of our normal everyday habits, so to speak, and that will be a direct connection. So
Make teshuvah.
Absolutely. There's the essence of tshuva. Yeah, beautiful. So let's have that be the focus of our meditation. I think it'll be a good time. If you're with us online, please find yourself in a comfortable seated position. And let's bring our breathing to a nice, delicious depth. Such pleasure in breathing. We can start to appreciate that. Deep in and deep out. Let's even out. There are 4 stages of breath we've learned about. So we'll breathe in for 4 and keep that breath within me for 4, then release out for a count of 4, and then leave myself empty for a count of 4, and then start again. So with me, breathing in 1, 2, 3, 4. Keep that in. 2, 3, 4. Release through your nose. 2, 3, 4. Nice and empty. Stay there. 2, 3. Back in through your nose if you can. 1, 2, 3, 4. Nice and full. 2, 3, 4. Release out. 2, 3, 4. Staying empty. If you can get your abdomen to do most of the work, let's let it open as we breathe in. Abdomen swells, nice and full. Stay there. 2, 3, 4. Belly pulling back up as the breath expels. 3, 4, and empty. Keep that cycle on your own pace. Let's invite Chokhmah into our meditation. Our gateway for Chokhmah is the space between the end of the in-breath and the beginning of the out-breath. It'll be our Chokhmah gateway. We're still going through the 4 counts. Our breath is even and deep and full, but we're kind of staying in that wisdom gateway. It's a spiritual intention. Now, finally, let's introduce this divine concept into that gateway. In this month of Tshuva, this month of Elul, the infinite is right available in the field, so to speak, right touching reality. All I need to do is reach out with my mind and my heart, and the infinite is right there with a smiling countenance, welcoming back, like the oldest of friends, like the most loving of parents. Let that image fill my mind. The king is in the field. Meditation in Kabbalah is a process of expanding the details of a divine concept so that it fills my mind like a cup of wine to the brim. So let that fill all emotional space in your mind, all visual space. Hear the sound of the encounter. Make sure that you are in the picture, so to speak. And if the screen in your mind is a small screen, just enlarge it so it expands up to your full width of your mind. And notice, as I always say, if this meditation, this contemplation is inspiring feelings of reverence, feelings of love, those will be the wings that will let my tshuva soar upwards and connect to the highest levels. It is good to continue this for 10, 15, 20 minutes, but if you're in our class, we're out of time. So feel free, if you're meditating on your own, to continue. If not, if you're with us, please open your eyes, wiggle your fingers. I want to wish all of you yasher koach, good learning, good meditating. We created some wonderful energy to get us into the new year. And I hope we will see you, whether online or in person, for our Rosh Hashanah services. And I'm wishing each of you a very, very sweet new year of learning together. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.